Hey, what's going on, Nova Nation? It's CJ Wilson here with DoakTalk. I'm your host, here to bring you guys another episode of Behind Enemy Lines. I have a special edition for this Friday night matchup against the Duke Blue Devils. Here with me, I have Stephen Wiseman, Duke sports writer for the Raleigh News and Observer. Stephen, how's it going? It's really good to hear from you again.
Yeah, CJ, good talking to you. Everything's going well up here in Durham, and looking forward to a fun Friday night like when the Seminoles come to town.
Most definitely. I have to ask, you guys are 5-1, riding high, really high right now. National TV game Friday night. How do you feel like, well, as far as the excitement around Duke? Let's talk about the excitement that Manny Diaz is bringing in year one for the for the Duke Blue Devils, and also just like I said, big time matchup Friday night. Just the atmosphere coming up for a Duke game. You don't really hear it too often, but it's a big time, like I said, Friday night matchup, an important ACC matchup for Duke. So I'm pretty sure there's a lot of electricity within the air right now.
There is, they've kind of picked up, where Elko left off last year, right? They started off really hot last year before Riley Leonard, the quarterback, got hurt, and then that happened, at Tallahassee's where he went out in the third quarter there, and they let that lead get away, and so they ended up going 7-5 last year after going 8-4 with the bowl win the year before, so 9-4 and then 8-5. Elko left, took the Texas A&M job, and Manny Diaz came in and has kind of picked up. They're playing really good defense, like they did under Elko. That was kind of their calling card. Was the defense is kind of where it went. And Manny, of course, with a great defensive background from all the places he was defensive coordinator, most recently Penn State. So Elko did a great job of getting the students involved and making kind of really an atmosphere of their student section, and really good attendance, which was something that Duke has really struggled with over the years, being such a great basketball school. I mean, the Cameron Crazies are known for their impact on games, but it never really had crossed over to football. Now, last year when Duke beat Clemson to open the season, the fans stormed the field. It was a big event, and they really got into that. And then this year it's happened again when they beat North Carolina. They hadn't beaten their rivals since 2018. So Duke came back from 20-0 down, win that game 21-20. And the students stormed the field again. So it's like this atmosphere is starting to build, right? I mean, it's starting to be a really fun place for the students to come to games, and they're getting better crowds because of that. And so I expect that to be the case, Friday night when Florida State's in town.
You mentioned quarterback Riley Leonard ended up transferring to Notre Dame. Now you bring in Malik Murphy, who was under the helm at quarterback. Just talk about the transition from Leonard to Malik Murphy and what he brings to the table for Duke.
Yeah, it's been, it's a whole new coaching staff, so it's going to be a different offensive system. But it's been dramatic in that, Riley did as much work with his feet and his legs as he did with his arm. And you're seeing that at Notre Dame again this year. He was really a threat to run the ball. And Malik just doesn't do that. He's in the pocket. He doesn't tuck it under and run. He's out there. He's got a big arm, and he's a big guy. He's like 6'4", 6'5", 240. So you think he could run over some people, but that's not what they ask him to do, and that's not what he does. But he could throw the deep ball. He's got a stronger arm than Riley Leonard did or does, and so that's what the transition's been like. It's been more take some shots down the field. Throw the ball, on any down. They'll throw it deep on 1st and 10 if they have to. They want to establish the run, but Malik, is out there to hit some deep balls, and they're not afraid to do that. That was not the case the last few years under Duke's coaching staffs, and I will say the fans like that. They like him taking those deep shots because obviously you're not going to hit a lot of them, but when you do hit one, it's a home run, right? So that's what you want to do.
Yeah, you're talking about momentum changing type of players. So I'm with the fans. I like the deep shots as well. Talk about the running back room and what Art Thomas brings to the table.
Yeah, so that was something that they brought in Star Thomas from New Mexico State as a transfer. He was not brought in to be a starter. Jaquez Moore was going to be the starter. He was the returning guy after Jordan Waters transferred to NC State, who was the leading rusher last year, and I think he scored 12 touchdowns last year for Duke. So that was a big loss. But and Moore was in the transfer portal also, and when Diaz got hired, they convinced him to stay. So he started off the year as a starting running back, but he got hurt in the second game of the year up at Northwestern, suffered a foot injury. He played a little bit against Georgia Tech, but after missing 3 games, but then wasn't able to finish the game. So Star Thomas has taken over, and He's the leading rusher right now. He's already had a couple of 100-yard games. He had a great game against North Carolina with 166 yards and caught a touchdown pass, ran for another one. He's really been a revelation because if it would not have brought him in, they'd have really been in trouble, when Moore got hurt. Now they also have Peyton Jones behind Star Thomas now, who's a sophomore who probably is going to be the running back of the future, next year, provided they keep him around. Transfer portal is always interesting, but if you look toward the future, Peyton Jones is going to be probably their starting running back next year, and he's getting a little bit of work this year behind Thomas, but Thomas has become the main guy, and I would expect that to be the case Friday night.
Steve, you mentioned the deep shots with this new offense and a stronger arm in Malik Murphy. Let's talk about the receivers he'll be throwing to in Jordan Moore, Eli Panko, and a few others. Just talk about the receiver room and how effective they've been for this 2024 season.
Yeah, I mean Jordan Moore, was really he had a strong season last year, and he's continued that this year. He is Murphy's favorite target. If you look at the targets and stuff, he's the one. The ball goes to him more than anybody. But they're starting to adjust now because defenses are starting to double team Jordan Moore. He's that kind of a threat. So Murphy will now look to other people, look to Samir Hagans or look to Eli Pancol. And Eli's a really good story because he missed all last season and most of the season before that with injuries. So just to have him back on the field, it really meant a lot to Eli. They didn't know what they get out of him. He's really having a great year. I forget, I don't have the stats. I'm sorry. I don't remember exactly how many touchdowns he has, but I know he has quite a few. I know he's been a big time target to them. So, that's been very helpful. He's a big guy. He's a really good athlete. Eli Pancol. He's like 6'4", and he was a great high school basketball player in Indiana. He probably could have played Division I college basketball, but he chose to play football at Duke, and so he's been a big help. And then the tight end Nicky Dalmolin decided to come back. I know we're going to talk to tight ends in a minute, but that kind of bleeds into the passing game a little bit. But Nicky was a guy that gave up football when Elko left. He was going to graduate and move on with his life, with his career outside of football. And he came out. He wasn't in spring practice, but he came out to a couple spring practices and watched his buddies and kind of liked what they were doing with the tight end. The tight end was a little more involved. So they talked to him and he decided to come back out to the team. Had a great summer of weight work. Won some awards, internal team awards for his work in the weight room, and he is more involved in the offense this year. He's a good blocker, but he also can catch, that seam right over the middle, which the tight end is always tough. So that gives them another weapon in the passing game with Nicky Dalmolin that they weren't sure they were going to have, but it really is important that they do have him.
That's a good story. You're right. I was going to transition to the tight ends next, but you already covered that. So let's go ahead and jump into the offensive line and physical play on both sides, defensively and offensively, was something that Elko instilled with Duke, and he built a pretty good offensive line for the Duke Blue Devils, and is transitioning over. Let's talk about the offensive line and what they bring to the table going into this game as well.
Yeah, I mean, they've kind of settled on a starting five that play almost every snap, which is really unusual in Power 4 now football. But those guys have been doing great, and the funny thing about that is, in spring they only had 7 healthy offensive linemen because they had guys that left for the NFL like Graham Barton and Jacob Monk, and other guys that had transferred out, and some transfers they knew they were getting but weren't there yet. So they couldn't even run a spring practice. Like the spring game was basically like a 7-on-7 because there was no way to run, scrimmage plays with no offensive linemen. And I tell you that background to tell you that when those guys got together in the summer, Bruno Fina came from UCLA and Caleb Craigs came from Elon, an FCS program. They had to gel really quickly, and it was a big concern. They were looked at as the weakness of the team because there was so much uncertainty. And lo and behold, they've really become a strong unit. I mean, they're very low in the number of like pre-snap penalties or holding and stuff like that. Things that you would expect from a group that's not used to playing well together. And but they're doing it, and they've become pretty good. They've done a great job keeping Malik Murphy upright, and they've also opened some decent holes for Star Thomas. It's not perfect, not great. Obviously, they could be better, and they aim to be better in the second half of the season. But really, kind of a surprisingly strong unit there for Duke on the offensive line.
Let's transition over to the defensive side. Before we do, guys, all the folks that's watching this video, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. If you haven't, please like and subscribe. If you have, it means the world of favors to us. Transfer over to the defensive line and speak about what they bring to the table. Looking at some of the film and just looking at some of the stats, Vincent Anthony Jr. and Wesley Williams are some of the names that kind of stand out. Let's talk about the Duke's defensive line and how they can present a challenge for a struggling FSU offensive line, especially within the run game.
Yeah, that's another unit, kind of like the offensive line, that lost a lot of guys that had played a lot of football for Duke. Dwayne Carter was an All-ACC defensive lineman. He's now with the Buffalo Bills.
Peoples as well, playing good ball at Virginia Tech.
People's at Virginia Tech. Yep, Jamion Franklin played a lot of football for Duke recently, and he left and was with the Ravens in camp for a while. So, again, we didn't know what they would have, but we knew VJ Anthony was coming back. We knew Aaron Hall was coming back at defensive tackle. They brought in Kendry Charles as a transfer from Liberty, who's turned out to be a really good player. So they're getting good pressure there, and that's why you look at the defensive side of the ball. Duke's one of the better defenses in the ACC, and it's been 6 games in. They're only allowing 17.5 points a game. They're only, teams are only converting 29% of third downs, which is, one of the best in the country and clearly the best in the ACC. So that defensive front is doing their job, tying up blockers or getting penetration to free up things for the linebackers to make plays too. So again, a unit that we weren't sure was going to be as strong as last year's unit, but it's turned out to be, and that's been kind of a real strength for Duke.
FSU being one of the worst third down defenses in the country for this year. So hats off to that defense and Manny for getting off the field on third down. Talk about the linebackers real quick, and you guys have 3 guys that are pretty productive thus far within the season. A couple of guys that have been standing out as Alex Howard and Trey Freeman. Let's talk about that linebacker room and the type of challenge they present for the running game for FSU.
Yeah, so Trey Freeman, we expected, he was a returning guy, was one of the leading tacklers on the team last year as a kid from Durham, and we thought he would be really good. But what's been a surprise is Alex Howard, who is leading the team in tackles right now, who was a transfer from Youngstown State, another guy from a lower level of football, kind of like Caleb Creighton, as I mentioned, from Elon, who's come in and made a big impact, been a huge factor in, getting TFLs. And this defense Manny Diaz runs and defensive coordinator Jonathan Patke is big on getting tackles for loss and sacks and those havoc plays. It's what Manny's always done when he was at Miami or when he was at Penn State. That's kind of what they hang their hat on, is getting a lot of TFLs. That's why Duke's leading the ACC in like 10 TFLs per game, I think, is what their average is right now. So it's really strong. So the linebackers are a key part of that. Ozzie Nicholas is another guy that came in from Princeton, another guy they brought in lower level, and they've developed him. He's making plays. Nick Morris was the starting one of the starting linebackers who suffered an injury and hasn't played since the first game of the year. And yet they've been able to take Trey Freeman has moved around to all 3 linebacker positions this year. He's had to shuffle quite a bit, and that's why his numbers aren't quite as good. If you look at PFF, his rating isn't great, but he's been moving around so much. He's doing what they need him to do, but just not able to focus in on one area. So that's been one thing that has been interesting, and we'll see. Nick Morris is getting close to returning, so maybe that can solidify like where Trey is supposed to be and where Alex Howard is supposed to be. And they think they'll be better in the second half. But given all they've been through, they're really happy with the way the linebackers have played, especially with Morris being out for all these games.
All right, moving on to the secondary, you have safety Terry Moore and cornerbacks Chandler Rivers and Joshua Pickett that's playing good ball for Duke. To speak about the secondary and the type of challenges they are present for Brock Glenn, who's going into his second start on the season, the young redshirt freshman quarterback for FSU.
Yeah, those are all guys you mentioned that are returning players, and Duke had a lot of turnover this year with the coaching staff and the transfers, guys of the NFL, but they knew they were going to be pretty strong in the secondary. And Chandler Rivers is growing into a really strong cover corner as a sophomore, and they think he'll be an NFL player in a couple of years here. He's got that kind of ability. Terry Moore is a guy that came in as a running back and transitioned over to the defense a couple of years ago, and now he's making plays all over the field. They really like him. Joshua Pickett, another corner that played a lot last year. Jalen Stinson has missed a couple of halves of football for targeting penalties, so I guess watch out for him. He's a little bit of a, I don't want to call him, headhunter a little bit, maybe. I don't know. That's the rep because he's got 2 targeting penalties, and he got one in the bowl game last year, and then got another one early this year. So that if they keep him on the field, he's a really really strong hitter and a really good defensive player. Even though he's only 5'8", he hits pretty hard. But anyway, so again, those are 4 guys that played a lot of football last year. Cameron Bergeron is another guy to keep an eye on, number 4. He was hurt and didn't play much in the Georgia Tech game, and they really missed him. One thing about Manny's defense is they have one position that's kind of a hybrid linebacker safety. They can kind of switch people in and out of there. Sometimes Trey Freeman will play this spot, and he ends up having to cover a speedy receiver, which is a problem for Trey. But Bergeron's in there; he can hit and cover the run game. He's more of a safety, but then he can cover a little better. So when he's in there, that kind of frees up them to move people to where they need to be. And Bergeron was hurt a lot against Georgia Tech, the last game, which is why Duke lost that game, they think. But if he can be back healthy with the open week, he's had some time to heal. Having number 4, Kevin Bergeron, back will really help that secondary if he's in the game.
All right, Steve, let's kind of get into the meat of the conversation. Give me some do's and don'ts for Duke going into this game. FSU is 1-5. I think from an athletic standpoint, this is probably the best team on paper, so to speak, that from a collective talent, athleticism, and things like that, that Duke will play this, has played thus far in the season. Miami's on the schedule as well. So to speak about some of the do's and don'ts for the Duke Blue Devils for Friday night in order to get a win.
Yeah, and you're right about the talent on the field. Coaches like to not look at the records and all that, obviously. But Manny Diaz in our press conference today was talking about that this will be the most talented team they've played so far, and that's a little bit better than Carolina. Carolina had been up to that point, and Duke took care of them. But so they had a rally to do it too. So it wasn't like it was an easy game. A week after they'd given up 70 to James Madison, Duke only scored 21 on them. So that tells you, how things can change from one week to another. You don't look at the records of what happened before. It's all about the talent on the field. And, Duke knows that, man for man, the matchups, Florida State's got better athletes at just about every position, right? But Duke's playing better as a team right now, and that's what they have to do. They have to not turn the ball over. They have to do very well defensively on first and second down to force people into longer third down positions. That's what Duke has done. That's why they have such a good third down conversion rate as a defense, stopping people, because instead of having 3rd and 3 or 3rd and 4, it's like 3rd and 8, 3rd and 12, that kind of thing. And so they have to do that. They have to try to force, try to rattle Glenn and try to get some turnovers that way. Probably would have been easier with DJU, let's face it, right? So that's not the case now, given what's happened. But so that's a challenge. Duke has not been a great team running the ball this year. If you look at the stats, they're kind of down near the bottom of the ACC in rushing yards per game, even though Star Thomas is playing pretty well. And the offense has been prone to slow starts. They were shut out the first half against Carolina. Again, a week after the Tar Heels gave up 70 to James Madison, it was 17-0 at halftime. Carolina was winning. But yet once Duke gets going, once they finally get their groove, they're pretty hard to stop. It's kind of a weird thing that goes on with them. So obviously they want to get off to better starts. That would help the offense quite a bit. I expect this is going to be a low scoring game. We'll get to that score prediction later, but that's one thing to watch for that's one thing to watch for is, they've been off to slower starts. They were shut out in the first half against Carolina. And they had to, once they get going, they're pretty strong, but these slow starts have been a problem. And I know it's one thing that during the open week, the offensive coordinator, Jonathan Brewer, they've been working on that, trying to get in sync from the very beginning. And not fall behind in games, because that's always dangerous to do.
All right, Steve, like I said, it's that time as far as the score prediction. So give me a score prediction for this game. I agree it's going to be a low-scoring game. I think I'll go after you. So give me your score prediction for this game for Friday night.
Yeah, given, the way Duke has played defense this year, the fact that I think they're going to be healthier than they were against Georgia Tech. Even that night, they only gave up 24. I'm thinking this might be like a 20-10 game that Duke can win. I think they're favored by 3 points right now, so that would help them cover the spread. But I'm still not. I mean, I have to see Florida State's offense play better, obviously, to see if they can put points up. And so that's what I'm going with right now. I'll go 20-10 Duke.
All right, I think I'm gonna go. I'm gonna have a little bit of faith and go 20-17 FSU. I think Brock and FSU saw some things they could kind of build on against Clemson. Of course, having a bye week kind of helps after that, so you have another week in the fold to kind of get Brock up to speed with the skill guys and things like that. I feel like they may come out with a little bit more juice, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's a 20-10 game. Like you said, I know the atmosphere is going to be pretty rowdy up there and during for the game. But I'm gonna go with 20-17 FSU, and hopefully we get the second win on the season, which is crazy, for FSU. But I guess it's even crazy for Duke as well. We're kind of on opposite sides of the spectrum, but I do love it in regard to how Duke has been a formidable program within the ACC within the last couple of years. I think Manny Diaz is going to continue that trend for the Duke Blue Devils.
He seems to be, and their last 2 seasons and the first half of this one, they're 22-10, which, given where they were the last couple of years of David Cutcliffe when they kind of fell off there, they lost 13 ACC games in a row to end Cutcliffe's tenure. They've really turned it around well, and it's different. People are starting to, this is 3 seasons in a row now where they've played pretty good football, and people in Durham are starting to appreciate it. So that's always a good thing to see. But they've never, I will say, they've still never beaten Florida State, and that's something that was brought up a lot today. And the closest game they've ever played is a 7-point, 17-10, I think it was in 2017, which I think was Jimbo's last year, right? So,
Jimbo's last year. James Blackman was the starting quarterback. I remember that game.
Yeah. Last year's game was 38-20, and that was the second closest game in the series. So usually Florida State.
I think FSU was 20-0 versus Duke, if I'm not mistaken. But this is the first time we've been underdogs versus Duke, and Mike Norvell has been on the bad side of a lot of history for FSU. So this could be one of those first timer things. I hope not. But that's been echoed. That's been echoed as well on FSU's part as, hey, Mike, don't be the guy that loses to Duke for the first time. So I can see on both ends the spreader for that. Stephen, as always, a pleasure again. Make sure you guys like this video, subscribe to the channel, go Noles. And if you're a Duke fan, thank you for tuning in as well. Good information on both sides.